In this video, I'm going to create a simple Mongo replica set in Docker. For this, I'm going to instantiate 3 Mongo containers, a container for setting up the replica set, another one for admin Mongo, and a last one for Express application, a modified version of the one I created for the last video that connects to the replica set. Finally, I'm going to experiment a little bit with the replica set. A replica set is a group of MongoD instances that maintain the same dataset for providing redundancy and high availability. When a replica set is configured, a primary is elected while the other instances will remain as secondaries. The primary will be the instance to which you can send write and by default read requests, and the secondaries will be kept in sync with the primary. Whenever a primary is down, a secondary can start the process of becoming a primary so that the service is restored. Let's start with our 3 Mongo containers. For this, I'm going to use Mongo's official container called, perhaps not surprisingly, Mongo. Let's create a Mongo configuration file called mongo.conf and then add the rs0 as the replica set name and 1024 as the uplog size. Let's create a folder for the first Mongo container. For this one, I'm going to create a simple Docker file that uses the base Mongo image. I'm going to define user/src/configs as the default working directory, copy the mongo.config into the container using the copy instruction, expose the default port for a Mongo database, and finally just add a cmd instruction with the configuration file so that Mongo uses it when starting up. Let's add a data subfolder. This one will be the subfolder for our volume, which will allow us to keep the data even when we stop the Mongo container. Let's also create a folder for the other 2 containers, each with its own data subfolder. This is a good moment to create the Docker Compose YML file. Define the version at the top and add our 3 services. The first one is going to point to the Docker file inside the Mongo RSO-1 folder. Expose locally the same port as it does inside the container. Map the volume from our first data subfolder to data/db, which is the database folder inside the container. For the second and third containers, given that it is such a simple configuration, let's just use the base image without creating a custom Docker file. Let's define the image that we are using, in this case, Mongo. The same configurations that we defined for the replica set and the uplog on the first container, and let's add 1 to the mapped port on the local machine so that we can use the next one available. Let's just copy and paste it for the third container and do the same for the mapped port. Until now, we have only created the necessary configurations for getting up and running our Mongo containers. Our replica set has to be explicitly configured before it can be used. For that, I'm going to create another container. This container will be short-lived, but it will wait until our 3 Mongo databases are up and ready, and then it will initialize the replica set for us. Let's create a folder for the setup container, and then a script file that we can execute remotely using the Mongo shell. In this file, I will create an object for the configuration with rs0 as the ID, and we will add the 3 members for this replica set using the names for the services that we defined in the Docker Compose file. Then initiate and show the configurations for the replica set. Create a new file called setup.sh that will wait for a couple of seconds until hopefully the 3 Mongo containers are fully up, and then we'll connect to the first container using the Mongo shell and execute the script we created earlier for initiating the replica set. Let's create a Docker file for this container. We will need to also use the Mongo image as a base so we can use the Mongo shell, as I did for the first image. I will set the work dir as user src configs, copy the replicaset.js and setup.sh into the working directory using the copy instruction. And finally, I will instruct Docker to call the setup.sh file using the command instruction. Go back to the Docker Compose.yml file and add this container. I will use the name setup-rs and will define this to be also the name for the image that will get created. Define the folder for the Docker file and we'll define that this service requires that the first Mongo container is up and running. I will also add to that first container a dependency on the other 2 Mongo containers just to make sure that they start before everything else. Finally, I'm going to add an admin Mongo container so we can explore our new replica set without problems. For that, I will set the name of the service as admin Mongo, add the image to admin Mongo, map the local port 1234 to the same one exposed by admin Mongo container, and that's it. Now, let's play a little bit with our newly created replica set. First, let's only start the Mongo instances and admin Mongo using Docker Compose, app, Mongo RSO-1 and admin Mongo. In another window, let's query for the current state of the replica set. First, let's see which container is up by using docker ps. Let's use the first container to query the replica set for its status. Let's use docker exec mongo replica set, and well, the name for that container, bash -c mongo eval r as status. As we can see here, the instances are waiting for the replica set configuration, and given that none of the instances is set to be a primary, we won't be able to do anything yet. Let's now start all of our services and wait for the setup container to run. Query again for the status of the replica set as we did before. Now we can see a different result. The replica set has been configured, and if we go through the members of the replica set, we will see that in my case, it is the first instance, the one that was elected primary. Before we continue, if you're not sure what's the IP for your containers, just type docker machine IP. And it will give you the IP that you can use for your containers. In my case, it is 192.168.99.100. Let's configure the connection for the 3 Mongo containers in admin Mongo. Open the IP address for your container plus the 1234 port in a browser. And add one connection per MongoDB instance using the name for the service in the Docker Compose file. Let's try adding a new database and adding a connection, a collection, and some documents to the primary. Add a new document, add an entry. Okay, it works. If we try to simply query or do anything in any Mongo container but the primary, it will complain and will not allow us to do it that easily. Let's just be mean and bring down the primary. Let's use docker stop and the name of the container. After a couple of seconds, a new primary will be elected. Let's find out which one by querying for the status again, but using in this case the second container. If we scroll a little bit, we'll find that in my case, the third instance was the one elected primary this time. Let's query that instance in admin Mongo. Okay, now we can see everything there. Let's add a Node plus expressjs app and connect to the replica set. For this, I'm going to use the application created for the previous video. Let's copy the folder here and make some little changes. First, on the database.js file, I changed the connection string so that it has the list of Mongo instances for the replica set. Then I added a disconnect call before trying to connect to the DB, so that in case we were already connected, we could easily reset the connection. And then from the index.js, I removed the database initialization from the beginning of the file and added it to the first route so it was easier to reestablish a connection to the DB if needed. Go into the Docker Compose file and add a service for our test app. Let's call the service web app, set a name for the image, the folder in which the Docker file is so an image can be built from it, map the 3000 port, set the volumes the same way we did in the previous video, and finally set a dependency to the setup-rs container, which in turn will end up depending on everything starting up. The dependency won't give us any assurances into the state of the replica set, but at least we know that the configuration is in progress. Let's Docker Compose up our containers and give the setup container a couple of seconds to configure the replica set as we did before. Now let's open the IP address for your container plus 3000 for the port so that we can initialize our database connection. Then let's add to the URL /testfind to try to query the replica set. Nice work, it works. Awesome, congratulations and thanks for watching.